Mr Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Treasury Laws Amendment Prohibiting Energy Market Misconduct Bill 2019, the so-called Big Stick legislation. And before I go to some of the detailed legislation, I think it's important to actually talk about what has occurred in energy policy over the last 6 years under this government, because quite frankly, I can't think of any greater public policy failing in Canberra than this government's woeful energy policy experience. They've had 16 energy policies in 6 years. 16, Mr Deputy Speaker. And in fact, in 2018, they had 4 energy policies in 14 days. 4 energy policies in 14 days in the heady month of August. And the sad fact is it is Australian consumers and industry that is paying the price for this energy policy fiasco. Since 2015, wholesale electricity prices, so the cost of producing electricity, have risen by 158%, Mr Deputy Speaker, 158%. And in fact, over the last 12 months, future prices for electricity have risen by 29%. And we've seen a tripling of gas prices in this country under this hopeless government. We've seen ageing generators facing a long, hard summer ahead. We've got generators where 75% of our generators in this country are operating beyond their planned plant life, and it is of huge concern, Mr Deputy Speaker, because unfortunately that means more blackouts in this country unless we get new investment. More blackouts unless we get new investment. And I remember a fateful day in February 2018, Mr Deputy Speaker, when we hit 45 degrees in New South Wales. And I spoke to energy plant operators. I spoke to the actual workers in 4 power stations in my home region of the Hunter Valley. In the 4 power stations that cumulatively produce 9,000 megawatts of power is their capacity. They fully produce around 30% of Australia's electricity generation. And each of them was struggling very significantly under the high temperatures and the high demands that households and industry were placing on them. These are all power stations approaching the end of their natural plant life. That's what all their companies have said. Each of the companies involved, with the exception of Sunset Power, have placed closure dates on those power stations, not because of government policy, but because they are very old and the cost of maintaining them is skyrocketing. Obviously, Liddell has a closure of early 2023 set by the company. Origin has nominated 2032 for Eraring Power Station, the biggest power station in the country, and 2035 thereabouts for Bayswater. These are power stations that need to be replaced because of their age. But because of the energy policy fiasco from the government, 16 energy policies in 6 years, 4 in 14 days in 2018, investors can't make the hard decisions of investing in plant where the payback is 40 or 50 years. We're also not seeing the necessary rule changes for the energy market to keep up to date with evolving technologies and consumer preferences. These are the real issues facing the energy market, but sadly none of them are addressed by this Big Stick legislation. This Big Stick legislation, when it was first mooted by the government, had some serious issues. It had some serious issues in it, principally the fact that it was a backdoor to full privatisation of assets, particularly in Queensland, and also it gave far too much power to the minister, a minister who I think is up there in being the most incompetent minister in this government, and that's some competition there, but I think he takes the prize. So we worked on those 2 issues, and I'm glad to say that the government came on board and fixed up both those issues. Labor is proposing to further strengthen this bill, particularly to ensure that there is no risk of partial privatisation, which is another important concern. And Labor will also fight to protect workers' rights by ensuring their rights under the Fair Work Act are safeguarded in the event of divestment. Labor's support for the bill in this House is conditional on these improvements that protect basic worker rights and rule out partial privatisation. And Labor will continue to scrutinise the bill and is prepared to work with the Senate to address any further unintended consequences. Labor does remain sceptical that this bill will do what the government claims, lower power prices. The government has presented no evidence, no analysis or modelling to support this claim, and as I said, power prices have skyrocketed on their watch. That's why Labor is proposing an amendment to review the bill before it sunsets. This review will look at its impact on the electricity sector, including affordability. And Labor also calls on the government to work with experts and industry to ensure that there are no unintended consequences of the bill. And following further consultation, Labor is concerned that under the current bill, there is a risk that workers could lose protections and entitlements under the Fair Work Act in the event of divestment. Under the current bill, it is not clear that the sale of an asset due to a divestment order will be considered by courts to constitute a connection between the company subject to divestment and the purchaser of the asset, leaving open the possibility that the Fair Work Act transfer of business provisions will not apply. And that's why we're moving this amendment to ensure workers affected by divestment have all the protections they deserve under the Fair Work Act. And I'm hopeful the government will support this necessary amendment. So let me just say yet again why we're supporting this Act, even though we don't think that the bill will actually do much for the energy market. It's because we've got rid of the threat of full privatisation and we've dialed back the ridiculous powers granted to the minister, and we're hopeful of 2 further amendments around ruling out partial privatisation and greater worker protection can be addressed and support achieved from the government. I want to flag another issue which goes to the specific arrangements around the mooted closure of the Liddell Power Station. This power station is obviously very old. It's facing real issues around maintenance and reliability, and as such AGL have made the decision to close Liddell and replace it with a suite of other power sources, principally a new gas-fired power station at Tomago and a range of renewable energy, principally a wind farm and a pumped hydro project. And importantly, AGL's actually given plenty of notice to its workforce and the community. They've given 5 years' notice, which I think stands in stark contrast to the actions of Engie, who only gave 4 months' notice for Hazelwood, leaving the workers and the community in the lurch, and it also compares to the 5 months' notice given by Alinta when they closed the Northern Power Station in South Australia. So AGL has actually done the right thing and given 5 years' notice so the workers and the communities close to my electorate can actually plan their future. And as importantly as the notice, the company and the main trade union representing the workforce, the CFMEU Mining and Energy Division, have actually negotiated really solid outcomes to look after the workers. And a principle amongst that is a commitment from the company and the union that there will be no forced redundancies, that every single worker at Liddell who wants to continue with AGL will either transfer across to the neighbouring Bayswater Power Station or will be accommodated in other parts of AGL. And that's really important because there will be some workers who are probably approaching the end of their working life who are happy to take a redundancy package and retire early. But for many workers who might have young families and mortgages to pay, want to stay in industry. And so this is a fabulous initiative. It's an initiative that is consistent with what other countries have engaged in when they've seen major closures, and it's something that I applaud both the trade union and the company for engaging in a very honest and brave manner. And it's very important that if there is any divestment of Liddell, that these arrangements aren't undermined. Let me repeat that. Nothing in this bill should undermine what I think is nation-leading practice around transition of a closing power station. And that's why it's very important that the Senate look at this issue closely when it does its inquiry into this bill, because I cannot support any initiative that undermines worker entitlements, and that's why we've moved the amendment that we've talked about around Fair Work Act entitlements. Equally, we must ensure as much as we can that no consequence of this bill undermines the very important arrangements that the Mining and Energy Division, the CFMEU, has negotiated for its members with AGL at Liddell, something that gives those workers and the community around it peace of mind that they will still have jobs at the end of this process, a policy that I think is a very excellent policy. Related to the Liddell issue is the Liddell Task Force that the New South Wales government has formed with the Commonwealth to look at the all possible impacts of the closure of Liddell. somewhat bizarrely, Mr Deputy Speaker, so far the Commonwealth and state governments are refusing to have worker representation on this task force. They have representation from Muswellbrook Shire Council, and that's a good thing. They should have the local government representative. The company's clearly on the task force, but not to include workers is a disgrace, Mr Deputy Speaker. This closure can only be managed through cooperation between the company, the union and the workers it represents, and the local community. So it's essential that there is a representative of the CFME Mining and Energy Division on the Liddell Task Force, not to throw bombs, because that's not the way that they operate. It is to engage in a cooperative manner to try and arrive at an outcome that benefits the community, that looks after the workers and ensures energy security going forward. So I call on the Minister for Energy to actually engage and appoint a representative of the CFME Mining and Energy Division to the Liddell Task Force as a sign of goodwill, and quite frankly it's the best way of maximising the positive outcomes from that Liddell Task Force, should it actually have any. And this really goes to the heart of this entire energy debate, because the government is more intent on ideology than facts. They're more intent on ideology than facts, and we saw that with their civil wars in their party room around energy policy. 16 energy policies in 6 years, knocking off a Prime Minister principally because he actually tried to do something in this area. And this is not just having an impact on prices. As I said, wholesale energy prices up 158%, future prices up 29%, and a tripling of gas prices. It's leading to a massive missed opportunity in the transition that is occurring in energy production all around the world. We are missing out on the massive opportunity, just as we did in the first round of solar technologies that were developed. It's a little-known fact that 60% of the world's photovoltaic cells, the things on people's roof producing solar power, are based on technology developed at the University of New South Wales. But we got very little jobs out of this innovation because the Howard government was so virulently anti-renewable energy. That was a massively missed opportunity. And we're seeing another missed opportunity right now with the attack on renewable energy by this government. We've got a renewable energy strike going on right now because the delivery of the RET has been accomplished, Labor's RET has been fulfilled, and so renewable energy investment's falling off the cliff. And this is a massively missed opportunity. There are significant jobs to be gained in renewable energy if we've got sound investment. The hydrogen industry could produce 16,000 jobs for Australia, taking advantage of the massive demand that's going to occur for clean hydrogen in the economies of North Asia. We can also be the home of energy-intensive manufacturing again, because we have more solar radiation falling on our continent per square metre than anywhere else in the world, and we've got great wind and wave resources as well. So once we get through the transition to renewable energy, we can be the home of low-cost energy-intensive manufacturing. We're also greatly endowed with the inputs to the new clean energy technologies. We're the second largest producer of rare earths in the world. We've got the greatest reserves of iron and titanium, the second greatest reserves of copper and lithium, and the third greatest reserves of silver. These are all instrumental, these are all key to producing batteries, to producing solar PV cells and other technologies. So there's a great opportunity for key parts of our mining industry to benefit from the clean technology boom, and in fact our metallurgical coal sector can also benefit. It takes 200 tonnes of coking coal to produce one wind turbine tower, and that's great news for our coal industry, and it's something I wholeheartedly support. So these are the opportunities that are there to be embraced if we have stable and rational energy policy. Sadly, we're not seeing it from this government. We're seeing chaos and division. We're seeing 16 energy policies in 6 years. We're seeing ideology ran rampant. We've got half their party room who are the tinfoil hat brigade, who don't accept the science of climate change. They don't accept market realities, that renewable energy is now the cheapest form of new power. So we've got half their party room led by the member for Hughes, who are off in cuckoo land, and then we've got the other half that are probably worse, because they are ideologues. They are pragmatists. They think they can take political advantage of scaring people about climate change and taking action on greenhouse gas emissions. And they will be condemned by history, Mr Deputy Speaker. They will be condemned by their kids and their grandkids for putting their short-term political interests ahead of a necessary transition that will be good for the economy, that will lower power prices and produce a whole new generation of energy jobs.
Member's time has expired.